The ice broke beneath Lorelei Graham's boots with a sound like a gunshot, and before she could draw a breath to scream, the frozen creek swallowed her whole. The water was so cold, it felt like knives against her skin, stealing the air from her lungs and turning her limbs to lead. She had been crossing what she thought was solid ground, hurrying to reach town before nightfall on this bitter December day in 1882, when the deceptive layer of snow-covered ice gave way. Now the current pulled at her heavy wool skirts, dragging her down into the darkness beneath the frozen surface. Her fingers scraped uselessly against the underside of the ice, finding no purchase, no escape. Black spots danced across her vision as her lungs burned for air she could not reach. Then strong hands grabbed her shoulders, and she was being hauled upward with fierce determination. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, choking on air and water both. The hands did not let go. Through her blurred vision she saw a man, water streaming from his dark hair and his face set with grim focus as he pulled her toward the bank. He was soaked through just as she was, and she realized dimly that he had jumped in after her. He dragged her onto solid ground and she collapsed, coughing violently as water poured from her mouth and nose. Her whole body shook with cold so intense it felt like burning. The man was already moving, stripping off his own sodden coat and wrapping it around her shoulders despite being just as wet and freezing as she was. "We need to get warm now or we will both die," he said, his voice rough with urgency. "Can you walk?" Lorelei tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. She managed a nod. He pulled her to her feet and she staggered, her legs barely able to hold her weight. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms and began running, his boots crunching through the snow. "My horse is just ahead," he said. "Hold on." She had no choice but to cling to him, her frozen fingers gripping the wet fabric of his shirt. Through her daze she registered broad shoulders, a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green. He reached a large chestnut stallion that was tied to a tree, and somehow managed to mount while still holding her, settling her in front of him before spurring the horse into a gallop. The wind cut through their wet clothes like razors. Lorelei could feel the man shaking behind her, his arms tight around her waist as he guided the horse with his knees. She tried to stay conscious, but the cold was pulling her down into darkness. "Stay awake," he commanded, his voice close to her ear. "Do not give in to it. We are almost there." "Where?" she managed to whisper. "My ranch. 5 minutes. Stay with me." She fought to keep her eyes open, focusing on the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the solid warmth of the man's chest against her back. True to his word, within minutes a ranch house appeared through the swirling snow. He pulled the horse to a halt and dismounted, pulling her down after him. Her legs gave out immediately, but he caught her, lifting her again and carrying her toward the house. The door burst open and an older woman appeared, her eyes widening at the sight of them. "Good Lord, Warren, what happened?" "She fell through the ice," Warren said, striding past the woman into the house. "We need dry clothes and blankets immediately, and get the fire built up." The woman sprang into action as Warren carried Lorelei to a room near the large stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the main room. He set her down in a chair and knelt before her, his hands already working at the laces of her boots. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, his voice matter-of-fact despite the situation. "Martha will help you. I will be in the next room doing the same." Martha appeared with an armful of blankets and what looked like a nightgown. "Come on, dear. Let us get you sorted before you catch your death." Warren stood and left the room, and Martha quickly helped Lorelei out of her sodden dress and undergarments, her movements efficient but gentle. Lorelei's fingers were too numb to be of any help. Once she was wrapped in the dry nightgown and several thick blankets, Martha guided her to a chair that had been pulled close to the fire and began vigorously rubbing her hands and feet to restore circulation. The pain as feeling returned to her extremities was almost worse than the cold had been. Lorelei bit her lip to keep from crying out, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts to hold them back. Through the doorway, she could see Warren in the next room, now dressed in dry clothes, his own hands shaking as he pulled on thick wool socks. "You were lucky he was riding past," Martha said quietly. "That creek has claimed more than one life over the years. Most folks know better than to cross it this time of year, but you are not from around here, are you?" "No," Lorelei managed, her voice still weak. "I am from Austin. I was traveling to Gonzales to stay with my aunt. My wagon lost a wheel about 2 miles back. I thought I could walk the rest of the way before dark, but I must have gotten turned around in the snow." Martha shook her head. "You would have frozen to death before you reached town, even if you had not fallen through the ice. Gonzales is a good 8 miles from here." Warren appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp but his color returning. He had changed into dark trousers and a thick flannel shirt, and despite the circumstances, Lorelei found herself noticing how the shirt stretched across his broad shoulders. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably around 25 or 26, only a few years older than her own 22 years. "How is she?" he asked Martha. "She will live, thanks to you," Martha replied, "though you both gave me quite a scare." "What possessed you to jump into frozen water, Warren Mitchell?" "I was not about to stand there and watch her drown," Warren said simply. He crossed the room and crouched down beside Lorelei's chair, studying her face with those unusual gray-green eyes. "How do you feel?" "Cold," Lorelei admitted. "But better than I was. Thank you. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same. But you were the one who was there," she said. "And you risked your own life to do it. I am Lorelei Graham." "Warren Mitchell," he said, the corner of his mouth quirking up in what might have been a smile. "This is my housekeeper, Martha. And someone who has been trying to teach this boy since he was knee-high," Martha added with obvious affection. "Though clearly it has not always taken root. Now you both need hot food and rest. I will make some soup." She bustled off toward what must have been the kitchen, leaving Warren and Lorelei alone. He settled into the chair across from her, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. "Your aunt in Gonzales. She will be worried," Warren said. "Once the snow lets up tomorrow, I can ride to town and let her know you are safe." "I do not think she is expecting me at any particular time," Lorelei admitted. "My letter probably only just reached her. My father died 3 weeks ago, and there was no one else. My aunt wrote and offered me a place to stay, so I packed what little I had and left Austin." "I am sorry about your father," Warren said quietly. "Thank you. It was sudden, a heart ailment. He was only 48. She looked down at her hands, which were finally starting to feel like they belonged to her again. "I suppose I should have waited longer before traveling, or at least hired someone to accompany me, but I could not afford to keep the boarding house room and I wanted to start fresh somewhere new." "Gonzales is a good town," Warren said. "What does your aunt do there?" "She runs a dress shop. She is a widow, and she wrote that she could use help with the business. I am decent with a needle, so I hope I can be useful to her." Martha returned with 2 steaming bowls of soup and thick slices of bread. "Eat slowly," she instructed. "Your stomachs need time to adjust to being warm again." The soup was rich and savory, full of vegetables and chunks of beef, and Lorelei thought it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She ate slowly as instructed, feeling warmth spread through her body with each spoonful. Across from her, Warren ate with the same measured pace, though she noticed his eyes kept drifting to her face as if checking to make sure she was truly all right. "You will stay here tonight," Warren said once they had both finished eating. It was not a question. "The storm is getting worse and you are in no condition to travel. Tomorrow, if you are well enough, I will take you to your aunt's place myself." "I do not want to impose," Lorelei said, though truthfully the thought of going back out into the cold made her want to weep. "You are not imposing. I have a spare room, and Martha will make sure everything is proper and respectable. Besides, after jumping into a frozen creek to pull you out, I would like to make sure my effort was not wasted by having you freeze to death on the road." There was a hint of humor in his voice that made Lorelei smile despite everything. "Well, when you put it that way, I suppose I have no choice. Thank you, truly. I owe you my life." "Let us just say you owe me a conversation," Warren said. "I would like to hear more about you, if you are willing to share." Something in the way he looked at her made Lorelei's heart beat faster. She told herself it was just gratitude, the natural response to someone who had saved her life. But there was something about Warren Mitchell that drew her in, something beyond the obvious debt she owed him. They talked late into the night, the fire crackling beside them while the storm raged outside. Lorelei told him about growing up in Austin, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had died when she was 12. She told him about her love of books and her dreams of someday having a house with a real library, not just a few precious volumes kept on a single shelf. Warren listened intently, asking questions that showed he was truly interested, not just being polite. In turn, he told her about his ranch, how he had inherited it from his uncle 3 years ago when he was 23 and had been working to build it into something substantial. He ran cattle and broke horses, and from the way he described it, Lorelei could hear the passion in his voice. "It is hard work," Warren admitted. "There are days when everything that can go wrong does go wrong, but there is something about this life that gets into your blood. The freedom of it, the challenge, building something with your own 2 hands." "It sounds wonderful," Lorelei said, and meant it. There was something appealing about the life he described, even with its hardships. "It can be lonely," Warren said quietly. "A ranch is no place for a man alone, or so my uncle used to say. He never married, and I think he regretted it." Before Lorelei could respond, Martha appeared and announced firmly that it was time for Lorelei to rest. Warren stood immediately and bid Lorelei good night, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Martha led Lorelei to a small but comfortable bedroom and helped her into the bed, piling blankets on top of her until she was cocooned in warmth. "He is a good man, that Warren," Martha said as she prepared to leave. "Saved more than one creature over the years, animals and people both, but I have never seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at you tonight." Lorelei felt her cheeks warm. He was just being kind. "I am a stranger he pulled from a creek." "If you say so, dear," Martha said with a knowing smile. "Sleep well." Alone in the darkness, Lorelei found her thoughts returning again and again to Warren Mitchell. She told herself she was being foolish, that gratitude was clouding her judgment. But when she finally drifted off to sleep, it was with the memory of gray-green eyes and strong arms pulling her from the darkness. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, but then memory came flooding back. She sat up, relieved to find that, except for some soreness in her muscles, she felt surprisingly well. Her dress had been hung near the door, clean and dry, and she dressed quickly. When she emerged into the main room, she found Warren at the table, papers spread out before him. He looked up at her approach and his face brightened in a way that made her breath catch. "You look much better," he said, standing. "How do you feel?" "Much better, thank you. I cannot believe how well I recovered." You are young and strong, Warren said. That helps. Are you hungry? Over breakfast, Warren informed her that he had sent one of his ranch hands to town at first light to locate her aunt and inform her that Lorelei was safe. I thought you might want to rest one more day before making the journey, he said. The road will be treacherous after all that snow, and I want to make sure you are truly recovered. Lorelei knew she should insist on leaving immediately, that it was not proper for her to stay any longer than necessary. But the truth was, she was not ready to leave yet. The thought of never seeing Warren Mitchell again made her chest tighten in a way she did not quite understand. If you are certain it is not an imposition, she said. It is not, Warren assured her. Besides, I could use the company. It has been just me and Martha and the ranch hands for so long. It is nice to have someone new to talk to. The ranch hand returned late that afternoon with a message from Lorelei's aunt saying she was relieved Lorelei was safe and inviting her to come to town whenever she was ready. But he also brought troubling news. The wagon Lorelei had abandoned on the road had been found by scavengers who had taken everything from it, including all of her possessions. Lorelei felt tears prick her eyes as the reality sank in. Everything she owned in the world had been in that wagon. Her mother's wedding ring, her father's pocket watch, the few dresses and books she had managed to keep. All of it gone. I am so sorry, Warren said, his voice heavy with sympathy. I know that does not help, but I am truly sorry. It is not your fault, Lorelei said, wiping at her eyes. I should have been more careful. I should have stayed with the wagon. And frozen to death. No, you did the right thing trying to reach shelter. Those things can be replaced. Not all of them, Lorelei said softly. My mother's ring, my father's watch, those were all I had left of them. Warren was quiet for a moment, then he stood and crossed to a cabinet on the far wall. He opened it and pulled out a small wooden box, which he brought back to the table. This was my mother's, he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver locket. She died when I was 10. My uncle gave this to me when I came to live with him, said I should keep it for someone special someday. He held it out to Lorelei. I want you to have it. I know it is not the same as what you lost, but maybe it can be something to remember that even when we lose things, we can find new treasures. Lorelei stared at the locket, then at Warren's earnest face. I cannot take this. It belonged to your mother. And I am giving it to you, Warren said gently. Please. It would mean a lot to me to know it was with someone who would appreciate it. Slowly, Lorelei reached out and took the locket. It was beautiful, engraved with tiny flowers. When she opened it, she found 2 small portraits inside, a man and a woman who must have been Warren's parents. They both had kind faces, and the woman had the same unusual gray-green eyes as her son. Thank you, Lorelei whispered, her voice thick with emotion. This is incredibly generous. It is the least I can do, Warren said. You have had a terrible few weeks. If I can make even a small part of it better, I want to. That evening, Warren took Lorelei on a tour of the ranch, showing her the barn where he kept his horses and the pastures where his cattle grazed. The snow had stopped, and the world was blanketed in white, beautiful and pristine in the fading light. Warren pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about the land and the animals, and Lorelei found herself captivated by his passion for this place he called home. They stood at the fence line, looking out over the frozen landscape, and Lorelei realized she had never felt so at peace. Despite everything she had lost, despite nearly dying just yesterday, in this moment she felt oddly content. What are you thinking? Warren asked softly. That this is beautiful, Lorelei said honestly. That I understand why you love it here. It grows on you, Warren agreed. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Lorelei, I know we have only just met. I know the circumstances have been unusual to say the least. but I feel like I have known you much longer than a day. Is that strange?" "No," Lorelei said, her heart racing. "I feel the same way." Warren reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I would like to see you again. After you go to your aunt's, I would like permission to call on you." "I would like that too," Lorelei said, and realized she meant it with every fiber of her being. They stood there in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, and Lorelei thought about how strange life was. Yesterday she had been alone in the world, grieving and frightened, heading toward an uncertain future with nothing but the clothes on her back. Today she was standing here with a man who made her heart race, a man who had literally pulled her from death and offered her kindness and compassion without expecting anything in return. The next morning, Warren drove Lorelei to Gonzales in his wagon, the journey taking just over 2 hours on the snowy roads. Her aunt's dress shop was in the center of town, a neat building with large windows displaying beautiful gowns. Lorelei's aunt, a plump woman in her 50s named Henrietta Gordon, rushed out to embrace her the moment the wagon pulled up. "Oh, my dear girl, you gave me such a fright," Henrietta exclaimed. "When that young man came with the message yesterday, I nearly fainted. To think you almost drowned." "I am fine, Aunt Henrietta," Lorelei assured her. "Thanks to Mr. Mitchell." Henrietta turned to Warren, who had climbed down from the wagon. "I cannot thank you enough for saving my niece. You must allow me to repay you somehow." "That is not necessary," Warren said politely. "I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time." "Nonsense. You must at least stay for lunch," Henrietta insisted. Warren glanced at Lorelei, who found herself nodding encouragingly. "I would be honored," he said. Lunch turned into dinner, as Henrietta peppered Warren with questions and insisted on hearing every detail of the rescue. By the time Warren finally prepared to leave, night had fallen and Henrietta had extracted a promise from him to return for Sunday dinner in 2 days. At the door, Warren took Lorelei's hand. "I will see you Sunday," he said quietly. "I am looking forward to it," Lorelei replied. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Lorelei had the distinct impression he wanted to say something more. But with Henrietta hovering nearby, he simply squeezed her hand and left. The next 2 days passed in a blur as Henrietta put Lorelei to work in the shop, teaching her the intricacies of measuring and fitting, and the art of dealing with demanding customers. Lorelei found she enjoyed the work, and her aunt was patient and kind, if a bit overwhelming in her enthusiasm. But through it all, Lorelei found her thoughts returning again and again to Warren Mitchell. She caught herself watching the clock, counting down the hours until Sunday dinner. When Warren arrived precisely at noon on Sunday, dressed in a clean shirt and jacket, his hair neatly combed, Lorelei felt her heart skip a beat. Over dinner, he charmed Henrietta with stories about his ranch and asked intelligent questions about the dress shop. But his eyes kept finding Lorelei's across the table, and each time their gazes met, she felt that same flutter in her chest. After dinner, with Henrietta's permission, Warren took Lorelei for a walk through town. The day was cold but clear, the sun bright against the snow. They walked slowly, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "Your aunt is wonderful," Warren said. "I can see where you will be happy here." "She is very kind," Lorelei agreed. "The shop is doing well, and she says she really does need the help. I think this will be a good fresh start for me." "Good," Warren said. Then, hesitantly, "Lorelei, I meant what I said at the ranch, about wanting to see you again. I know it is fast, but I cannot stop thinking about you." "I cannot stop thinking about you either," Lorelei admitted. "When I am working in the shop, I find my mind wandering to you. To the ranch, to our conversations." Warren stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Then let me court you properly. Let me come to town every Sunday, take you to dinner, get to know you better. I want to see where this leads." "So do I," Lorelei said softly. Warren smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him even more handsome. "Then we are in agreement." He called on her every Sunday for the next 2 months, and slowly Lorelei found herself falling completely in love with Warren Mitchell. He was kind and thoughtful, always bringing small gifts for her and Henrietta. Flowers when he could find them, a book he thought she might enjoy, a beautiful ribbon for her hair. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, and Lorelei discovered they had similar values and dreams for the future. In March, Warren invited Lorelei to visit the ranch again, with Henrietta as chaperone. They spent the day touring the property, and Lorelei could see the improvements Warren had made even in the short time since she had last been there. New fences, a repaired barn roof, a small garden plot that Martha was preparing for spring planting. "I want to build this place into something lasting," Warren told her as they stood looking out over his land. "Something I can be proud of, something I can share with someone." He turned to her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Lorelei, I am in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I pulled you from that creek and saw your face. These past months have only made me more certain. I know it has not been long, but when you know something is right, you know." Lorelei felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too. I was so afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, but I do. I love you, Warren." Warren pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a gentle kiss full of promise and hope. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. "Marry me," Warren said. "Be my wife. Help me build this ranch into a home. Say you will spend your life with me." "Yes," Lorelei said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They told Henrietta that evening, and while she expressed some concern about the speed of the courtship, she could not deny how happy they made each other. "Your father would have wanted you to be happy," she told Lorelei. "And that young man clearly adores you. You have my blessing." They were married in May, in a small ceremony at the church in Gonzales with Henrietta and Martha and Warren's ranch hands in attendance. Lorelei wore a beautiful dress that Henrietta had made for her, and Warren could not take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed her with such tenderness that Lorelei felt her heart might burst with joy. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the room that was now theirs together. Warren was gentle and patient, and Lorelei discovered a passion she had not known she possessed. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Lorelei thought about how far she had come from that terrible day when she had fallen through the ice. She had lost everything, but in the losing, she had found something far more precious. The first year of marriage had its challenges. Ranch life was harder than Lorelei had anticipated, with long days and constant work. She learned to cook over the fireplace, to tend the garden, to help with the horses when needed. Her hands grew rough and calloused, so different from the delicate hands required for sewing in the dress shop. But she did not mind. She was building a life with the man she loved, and that made every hardship worthwhile. Warren was a devoted husband, always making sure Lorelei felt appreciated and loved. He helped her when the work became too much, and he never made her feel inadequate when she struggled with something new. At night, they would sit by the fire and talk, and Lorelei would read aloud from books while Warren worked on tack repair or other small tasks. Martha remained with them, a constant presence and source of wisdom. She taught Lorelei the secrets of running a ranch household, and the two women became close friends. On the occasions when Warren had to travel to buy or sell cattle, Martha made sure Lorelei was never lonely. In December of 1883, exactly 1 year after her near drowning, Lorelei discovered she was pregnant. She told Warren on the anniversary of the day they met, and he was overjoyed, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Lorelei told him, cupping his face in her hands. "And you will be an incredible mother," Warren replied, kissing her softly. Their son was born in August of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray-green eyes. They named him William, after Warren's father, and Warren was besotted from the first moment he held his son. Lorelei watched her husband cradling their baby and felt such overwhelming love she could barely contain it. "Thank you," Warren whispered to her as she recovered from the birth. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for agreeing to marry me. Thank you for being willing to build this life with me." "Thank you for pulling me from that creek," Lorelei replied, only half joking. "Thank you for showing me what love really is." As William grew, the ranch prospered. Warren's hard work and dedication paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and hire additional ranch hands. Lorelei transformed the house into a real home. With curtains she sewed herself and furniture they bought together on trips to San Antonio. Warren built her the library she had always dreamed of, a whole room with floor-to-ceiling shelves that they slowly filled with books. In 1886, their daughter was born, a little girl they named Lily. She had Lorelei's dark hair and her mother's stubborn spirit, and Warren doted on her just as much as he did on William. Lorelei watched her husband with their children and marveled at how gentle this strong cowboy could be, how patient and loving. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. William was 3, carefully building a tower of blocks while baby Lily gurgled contentedly in Lorelei's arms. "Neither did I," Warren admitted. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "That day I found you drowning in the creek, I thought I was just saving a life. I had no idea I was saving my own future. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been riding past that day?" Lorelei asked. Warren was quiet for a moment. "I used to," he said finally, "but not anymore. I think somehow we were meant to find each other." "Maybe it sounds foolish, but I believe that." "It does not sound foolish at all," Lorelei said. "I believe it too." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Lily was all fire and energy, constantly getting into mischief and keeping everyone on their toes. In 1889, they welcomed another son, Lucas, who was quieter than his siblings but just as beloved. Henrietta visited often, and Lorelei made regular trips to town to help in the dress shop when her aunt needed extra hands. The shop continued to thrive, and Henrietta hired additional seamstresses to keep up with demand. She became a fixture in their children's lives, a doting great aunt who spoiled them shamelessly. Martha remained with them until she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1891, at the age of 72. They buried her on the ranch, on a small hill overlooking the creek where Warren had saved Lorelei's life. Warren carved the headstone himself, and Lorelei planted flowers around the grave that bloomed every spring. "She was family," Warren said at the funeral, his voice thick with emotion. "She raised me when my uncle could not figure out what to do with a grieving boy. She taught me what love and loyalty looked like. We will miss her every day." The loss hit them hard, but they supported each other through the grief, just as they had supported each other through every challenge they had faced. That was the foundation of their marriage, Lorelei realized. Not just love, though there was plenty of that, but partnership. The sense that they were in this life together, facing whatever came side by side. In 1893, Warren was approached by a group of neighboring ranchers about forming a cooperative to help negotiate better prices for their cattle. Warren threw himself into the effort, and by the end of the year, the Guadalupe Valley Cattlemen's Association was formed, with Warren as one of the founding members. The cooperative helped all the local ranchers, including Warren, to stabilize their incomes and weather the occasional hard years. Lorelei remained active in town life as well, helping to establish a lending library and teaching sewing classes to young women who wanted to learn a trade. She never forgot how alone she had felt when her father died, how uncertain her future had seemed. She wanted to help other women who might find themselves in similar circumstances. "You have such a generous heart," Warren told her one evening after she returned from teaching a class. "It is one of the 1,000 things I love about you." "Only 1,000, Lorelei teased. "At least 1,000, Warren replied, pulling her into his arms. "Probably more like 1,000,000. Even after more than a decade of marriage, they still felt like newlyweds in many ways. They still talked for hours, still laughed at each other's jokes, still reached for each other in the night. The passion between them had not dimmed, but had deepened into something richer and more complex, woven together with shared history and mutual respect. As the century drew to a close, William was now 15, already taller than his father and eager to take on more responsibility around the ranch. Lily was 13, beautiful and headstrong, with a dozen boys already vying for her attention, much to Warren's consternation. Lucas was 10, quiet and bookish, more interested in reading than ranching, but still willing to do his share of the work. "They are good children," Lorelei said to Warren one night as they prepared for bed. "We have been so blessed." "We have," Warren agreed. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her close, resting his head against her stomach. "Do you remember that first night, after I pulled you from the creek? I could not stop looking at you. I told myself it was just to make sure you were all right, but that was not the whole truth. I was captivated by you from that very first moment." "I was terrified and half frozen," Lorelei said, running her fingers through his hair, which was now streaked with silver at the temples. "But even in my fear I noticed you. How could I not? You had just saved my life." "Best decision I ever made," Warren said, looking up at her with those gray-green eyes that still made her heart race. "Jumping into that creek, bringing you here, asking you to marry me, all of it, best decisions of my life." "Mine too," Lorelei said softly. In 1899, William married a sweet girl from town named Sarah, and Warren deeded him a portion of the ranch to build his own house and start his own herd. Watching their son begin his own life was bittersweet, but both Warren and Lorelei were proud of the man he had become. "He will do well," Warren said as they watched William and Sarah drive away after the wedding. "We raised him right." "We raised all 3 of them right," Lorelei corrected. "Though I am not looking forward to Lily attracting even more suitors now that her older brother is married." "She will think she is grown," Warren groaned. "Do not remind me. I may have to start sleeping with my rifle." "You will do no such thing," Lorelei said firmly, but she was smiling. "You will trust that we have raised a smart, capable young woman who can make her own good decisions." "When did you become so wise?" Warren asked, pulling her close. "I learned from the best," Lorelei replied, kissing him. "In 1901, tragedy struck when a prairie fire threatened the ranch. Warren and his ranch hands worked for 2 days straight, digging fire breaks and setting backfires to protect the property. Lorelei and the children hauled water until their arms ached, and Lily worked right alongside the men, refusing to stay safe in the house. When it was finally over, they had lost some pasture land in one of the barns, but the house and the majority of the ranch had been saved. Warren was exhausted and covered in soot, but he gathered his family close, and said a prayer of thanks that they were all safe. "Things can be rebuilt," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "But I could not bear to lose any of you." They rebuilt the barn bigger and better than before, and Warren made sure to include a lightning rod and other safety features. The experience had shaken them all, but it had also reminded them of what truly mattered. Not the land or the cattle or the money, but each other. In 1903, Lily married a young lawyer named James Henderson who had recently moved to Gonzales. Warren had his reservations at first, but James proved himself to be hardworking and devoted to Lily, and eventually even Warren had to admit he was a good match for their spirited daughter. "Two down, one to go," Warren said after Lily's wedding. Lucas, now 20, looked up from his book with a grin. "Do not count on grandchildren from me any time soon. I am quite happy with my books." "You say that now," Lorelei said, "but one day the right person will come along and turn your world upside down. Trust me." "Is that what Father did to you?" Lucas asked. "Yes," Lorelei said, smiling at Warren. "That is exactly what he did. In 1905, Henrietta passed away peacefully at the age of 76. She left the dress shop to Lorelei, who decided to keep it running by promoting one of the senior seamstresses to manager while maintaining ownership. The income from the shop provided a nice supplement to the ranch income and ensured that Henrietta's legacy lived on. "She would have been proud of you," Warren told Lorelei as they sorted through Henrietta's belongings. "Of the woman you have become, of the family you have built. She loved you very much." "I know," Lorelei said, tears streaming down her face. "She gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. She welcomed me with open arms. I will miss her terribly." Warren held her while she cried, just as he had held her through every sorrow and celebrated with her through every joy over their 22 years of marriage. Lucas finally married in 1907 to a school teacher named Margaret who shared his love of books and learning. They moved to San Antonio, where Lucas opened a bookstore, but they visited the ranch often, and Warren and Lorelei made regular trips to the city to see them. As Warren and Lorelei entered their late 40s, they found themselves with an empty house for the first time in decades. It was strange at first, the quiet, but they quickly adapted. They took the opportunity to travel a bit, visiting their children and grandchildren, taking trips to places they had always wanted to see. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land that Warren loved and the house where they had built their life together. Some evenings they would walk down to the creek, to the spot where Warren had pulled Lorelei from the icy water all those years ago. It looked different now, less threatening, just a peaceful creek winding through their property. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked one evening as they stood by the creek in the gathering dusk. "Marrying me, living this life. You could have stayed in town, married someone who could have given you an easier existence." Lorelei turned to him, taking his weathered face in her hands. They were both older now, with gray in their hair and lines around their eyes, but when she looked at him, she still saw the young cowboy who had jumped into frozen water to save her life. "I have never regretted a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, this ranch, our children, you. It has been everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me more than just my life back that day, Warren. You gave me a reason to live it." Warren kissed her, slow and sweet, and Lorelei felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt that very first Sunday when he had come to dinner at Henrietta's house. "I love you," Warren said. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you fighting to survive in that creek. I loved your strength and your courage. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Lorelei replied. "My hero, my husband, my everything." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, their arms around each other, remembering the past and grateful for the present. The creek flowed peacefully beside them, no longer a place of danger but a reminder of how their story had begun. In the years that followed, Warren and Lorelei settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper under William's management, with Warren acting more as advisor than active rancher, though he still rode out most days to check on things. Lorelei remained active in town, her sewing classes now taught by younger women, but still bearing her influence. She spent her time reading, gardening, and spoiling her growing number of grandchildren. By 1915, they had 7 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch house, once so quiet, was now regularly filled with the sound of children's laughter as their grandchildren came to visit. Warren proved to be just as devoted a grandfather as he had been a father, teaching the boys to ride and letting the girls help him feed the horses. "You are going to spoil them rotten," Lorelei told him one afternoon, as she watched him giving rides to 3 of their grandchildren at once. "That is what grandparents are for," Warren replied with a grin. On December 15, 1915, exactly 33 years to the day after Warren had pulled Lorelei from the frozen creek, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. William and Lucas had coordinated with Lily to make sure their parents knew nothing about it, and when Warren and Lorelei arrived home from a trip to town, they were greeted by their entire family. "What is all this?" Lorelei asked, looking around at the decorations and the table laden with food. "It is an anniversary party," Lily announced. "Not your wedding anniversary, but the anniversary of the day you met, the day Dad saved your life and changed all of our lives." Warren looked at Lorelei, his eyes bright with emotion. 33 years, he said softly. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "It does," Lorelei agreed, her own eyes filling with tears. William stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us what true love looks like, who built this ranch and this family with their own hands and their own hearts, who have shown us every day what it means to be partners, to weather storms together, to never give up on each other. We love you both." "To Mom and Dad," everyone chorused, raising their glasses. The celebration continued late into the evening, with stories and laughter and music. At one point, Warren pulled Lorelei aside, leading her out to the porch where they could have a moment of quiet. "This is a wonderful surprise," Lorelei said, leaning against him as they looked out over the moonlit ranch. "Our children did such a thoughtful thing." "We raised them well," Warren said. "You and I together. We built something lasting, Lorelei, not just this ranch, but a family, a legacy. When I am gone, this will continue. Our children, our grandchildren, all of them carrying forward what we started." "Do not talk about being gone," Lorelei said, gripping his hand tightly. "I am not ready to lose you." "I am not planning on going anywhere anytime soon," Warren assured her. "But when that day comes, whenever it may be, I want you to know that my life was complete, that you made me happier than I ever thought possible, that meeting you was the greatest gift I ever received." "You gave me the same gift," Lorelei said, tears streaming down her face now. "I was drowning, and not just in that creek. I was drowning in grief and loneliness and fear. You pulled me out of all of it. You gave me love and purpose and a family. You gave me everything." They held each other as the party continued inside, and Lorelei thought about the strange path her life had taken. If someone had told that frightened young woman freezing to death in an icy creek that she would end up here, surrounded by love and family, married to her rescuer and blissfully happy, she never would have believed it. But here she was, living proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things. That sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. that love can bloom even in the coldest, darkest times if we are brave enough to reach for it. Warren and Lorelei Mitchell lived many more years together, watching their grandchildren grow and even welcoming great-grandchildren before the end. They remained devoted to each other until Warren passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928, at the age of 71, with Lorelei holding his hand. Lorelei mourned him deeply, but drew comfort from their children and grandchildren, and from the knowledge that they had built something beautiful together. She lived another 8 years, spending her time writing down the story of her life with Warren so that future generations would know their history. When Lorelei passed away in 1936 at the age of 76, she was buried next to Warren on the ranch, near the creek where their story had begun. Their children made sure to plant flowers around both graves, flowers that bloomed every spring in a riot of color. The ranch remained in the Mitchell family for generations, passed down from William to his children and then to their children. The story of how Warren jumped into a frozen creek to save Lorelei became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of love and courage, and the power of being in the right place at the right time. And on cold December days, when ice formed on the creek, the Mitchell descendants would stand by the water and remember the day that changed everything. The day a cowboy saw a woman drowning and did not hesitate. The day two souls found each other against all odds. The day a love story began that would echo through the generations, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a single moment of bravery, and that true love, once found, never truly dies.